What's up guys, this is Nathan and I'm Reviewer Guy, and I'm here with another episode of my series Review Roundup. For those of you who are unfamiliar with this series, it features me giving my thoughts on albums that came out during the last 3 months that I wasn't able to make their own full-fledged review videos for. I'll be doing these in order of release date. So with all that out of the way, let's get on with this past quarter's Review Roundup. We're going to start the episode with an album that was technically released in 2019, but only in Japan. Since HYPERTOUGHNESS was released worldwide on January 15th, 2020, I'm going to count it as a Q1 2020 release. If you guys aren't familiar with Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, they're a Japanese Electronicore band. For those of you who watch anime, their music has been featured in the openings and endings of series like Parasite and Hunter x Hunter. This album doesn't really sound much different from any of their other material that I've heard. There are crunching guitars, pounding drums, a good mix of clean singing and harsh screaming, and plenty of electronics added throughout each and every song. Just about every song on the album features a dynamic shift more than once, and there are a fair amount of brutal breakdowns on here as well. Even though it's more of the same from the band, I can't help but like this record. The band shows a lot of energy throughout these 11 tracks, and there aren't really any bad songs on the album. I can do without Great Strange though, as the transitions on that song just sound awkward and jarring to me. I do wish there was a bit more diversity in the sound, but as a whole, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas put out an enjoyable record that I can see myself coming back to every now and then. Overall, I give HYPERTOUGHNESS a 7 out of 10. If you're a fan of Electronicore and digital hardcore, give this album a shot. If you can't stand heavy music mixed with electronics and a healthy dose of auto-tune vocals, this album probably isn't for you. British Lion is a side project of Steve Harris of Iron Maiden fame. It's a follow-up to his solo album of the same name, and I was intrigued in this release after hearing the song Lightning, which I still think is the best song on the album. However, given how the rest of this album is, that's not the biggest compliment. A lot of these songs are boring, the vocals on this album aren't that great, a good portion of the material goes in one ear and out the other, and songs like Land of the Perfect People just remind me of the cliches and cheesiness of classic metal in the wrong ways. However, I wouldn't say this record is straight up awful, as instrumentally I think it's pretty decent. There are a lot of good guitar parts on the album, as well as drums, and of course bass. Plus, like I said, Lightning is a solid track, and there are a couple of others on here at least worth checking out, like City of Fallen Angels and Legend. Although I will warn you that the vocals in those other two are pretty rough, especially in the chorus. Do I think the whole album's worth checking out though? Not particularly. If you're a fan of that classic style of hard rock and heavy metal, maybe, but even then, there are better projects. Overall, I give The Burning a 5 out of 10. I was expecting better from a Steve Harris project, but I guess just because a big name is attached to something, it doesn't automatically make it good. I've seen a lot of praise on this album online, plus I wanted to check out a few Bandcamp releases this year, so I figured I'd give it a shot. This is an electronic music project, and it's interesting to say the least. It's different from most other electronic music I've heard. Everything is layered well, and it really knows how to work where your focus should be. That being said, I also find it to be a bit repetitive. The songs drag on for far too long in my opinion, and I swear the same drum machine pattern is being used on just about every track. I'm also not too big on some of the samples used on here, like on the song HYPERTOUGHNESS. I'm sure I pronounced that wrong, but either way, it's not for me. There are some good tracks on here though, like the infectious Lexapro Delirium, or the vaporwave-esque closer Slow Death. This is a unique project for sure, but as a whole, I don't think it's really my cup of tea. Overall, I give Draining Love Story a 6 out of 10. If you're a fan of electronic music and haven't given this album a listen yet, try it out and see what you think. I'll get this out of the way right now. This is a painful album for me to listen to, but in the best way possible. I've seen that plenty of other people have been talking about the new Spanish Love Songs album with a lot of praise, and since I was not familiar with the group, I decided to check it out for myself, and I was just blown away with the amount of emotion and pain that I could feel in the music each time I listened to this album. It appeals to the depressed millennials, especially the ones who are struggling, working dead-end jobs, living paycheck to paycheck, stuff of that nature. Needless to say, this disc hit home, and it hit home hard for me. This may sound odd, but I love how depressing the album is, simply because it shows this raw emotion that you can't really fake. The lead singer's voice is very emotive and flexible, and you can just hear the pain he's in. However, they also use this to be optimistic and uplifting, hence the title of the album, and it does a good job of that too. One thing that helps is the fact that there is great imagery in the lyrics. When I listen to these songs, I can actually envision the scenarios that are being talked out, which is both beautiful and depressing because of the subject matter, especially when you get into lyrics like "Take me out back and shoot me" or something of that nature. The instrumentation on this album is also fantastic. It's a 40-minute long indie rock meets pop-punk jam with the raw sounding guitars, solid bass, and bombastic drums. Not to mention the seamless transitions really make this album feel complete. I think this album is pretty much perfect, but I noticed that I usually only want to listen to it in full, and not so much just select tracks, which isn't really a bad thing. It's just that this album is much better when listened to in full. Overall, I give Brave Faces Everyone a perfect 10 out of 10. We may be living in dark times right now, guys, but remember, just like Spanish love songs say in this album, it can't be this bleak forever. Grimes is another one of those artists that I heard a lot of hype about, and I just had to see what the big deal was for myself. I enjoyed her song We Appreciate Power, which is on the deluxe edition of this album, so she was off to a good start for me. There are some interesting tracks on here like So Heavy I Fell Through the Earth, My Name is Dark, and my personal favorite, the surprisingly calm and somber Delete Forever. Considering this is probably the most different track on the whole album, I wasn't expecting it to be my standout favorite, but that's the way it goes sometimes. There are some songs on here that I really don't care for, like Dark Side, and the repetitive and boring album closer, Idoru. The production on the record is pretty good, but it's not exactly my style. This is an industrial art pop type of album, which is a type of music that only clicks with me sometimes. There are a couple of tracks on here that I'll probably revisit, and I think it sounds fine altogether, but it's just not really my cup of tea. Overall, I give Miss Anthropocene a 6 out of 10. I might give Grimes another chance in the future. There's definitely something there, but it's just not fully clicking with me right now. If you've seen episodes of Review Roundup before, you would know that I usually like to tackle albums from bands or artists that I'm not familiar with. This isn't the first entry on this episode that falls under that category, but I'm saying it here because, well, I didn't have another intro for this entry. Anyway, this is the third album from Rat Boys, and from what I've seen around, it sounds different than their past material. I can't really comment on that, but I will say this was a neat little listen. It's an indie rock project with a bit of a folk and country influence to it, even a little bit of a 90s alternative sound on one or two tracks. Julia Steiner has that country singer voice, but it fits well with their style of indie rock. Not to mention, there are several songs on this release that have a country guitar twang. I don't listen to a lot of country rock, so this was pretty interesting. There's nothing bad on here, but at the same time, nothing really stands out to me as wonderful. I do think this album is solid though, and worth at least one spin if you're curious. Overall, I give Printer's Devil a 7 out of 10. I don't know if I'll continue with the Rat Boys discography, but I'm glad I gave them a chance. This was a nice surprise. Code Orange have been around for quite a while. I remember back when they were called Code Orange Kids, and I listened to one of their songs, but I couldn't tell you which one because it went in one ear and out the other. Their 2017 album, Forever, is what really put the band on the map. I haven't heard it in full, but I enjoyed what I have heard, so I decided to check out Underneath. This sounds a bit different from what I've heard on Forever. The band decided to get a little experimental with this record, and for the most part, it really pays off. There's a great variety of brutal heavy tracks like Swallowing the Rabbit Hole, In Fear, and Erasure Scan, and more melodic tracks like Who I Am and the title track. I'm a fan of the vocal dynamic between Jamie Morgan and Reba Myers. They work well together, and the rest of the band does a fantastic job at backing them up instrumentally. This album feels just about complete, although I will say there are some weird glitch effects in a few songs, and even though that isn't uncommon for industrial music, it doesn't really stick with me in a good way. Despite that minor nitpick though, I'm really loving this album. Overall, I give Underneath a 9 out of 10. If you're in the mood for some experimental industrial metalcore, do yourself a favor and check out the new Code Orange album. Next up is the latest album from alternative rock and indie pop band Grouplove. I've always liked the group's style, especially the male and female vocal dynamic between Christian Zucconi and Hannah Hooper. This album brings more of that stuff I like from them to the table on songs like the energetic lead single Deleter, the catchy Expectations, and the surprising grower Burial. That song really picks up in the second half with the rocking drums and guitar, and Christian's vocals turn it up to 11. I definitely recommend that track. There are some less than stellar moments on this record as well though, such as Promises, a song that I just can't get behind the lyrics for, and The Great Unknown, which isn't bad, but I feel a disconnect with the track once the chorus hits. The rest of the songs on here either have good vocals or good instrumentation, but a number of these tracks don't really feel completely engaging. This may not be the best that Grouplove have done, but there are a few songs on here to add to the playlist without a doubt. Overall, I give Healer a 6 out of 10. If you're looking to get into Grouplove, I won't tell you to avoid this album, but I'd say start with their debut and work your way onward. Finally, we have the new album from In This Moment. Honestly, In This Moment have never been my cup of tea. I enjoy a few songs here and there, but in my opinion, they're a style over substance band. This album, though, is probably their weakest effort so far. Their style is played out for me. Their flashy metalcore style instrumentals with a slight gothic and industrial tinge to it gets dull really quickly for me, especially since it feels watered down in this album. Not to mention, there are 3 cover songs on the record and none of them are good. My least favorite of the bunch has to be the cover of We Will Rock You by Queen. It features Lizzie Hale of Hailstorm and Taylor Momsen of The Pretty Reckless, 2 other bands that I'm not that big into, and I don't like the way it sounds at all. In my opinion, this style doesn't fit the song, and it's not pleasant to listen to. Sure, Maria Brink is a talented vocalist. I won't take that away from her, but her vocal inflections just don't do it for me half the time. Sometimes they work, and other times they're a little grating. And finally, this album just drags on and on. You guys know how I feel about interludes. I don't mind them as long as they serve a purpose, and in my opinion, the 2 on this album really don't. There are also some tracks that could have been cut, such as Above, So Below, which is just a generic filler track. As for positives on this album, well, like I said, Maria is a talented vocalist. The rest of the band don't play terribly either. It's pretty solid, just bland in my opinion. I'll also say that God Is She is a pretty solid track, and surprisingly Hunting Grounds featuring Joe Cotella of Dead isn't bad either. Those 2 actually share a surprisingly decent vocal dynamic. As a whole though, this album just really isn't for me, and I'm sorry if this will upset some of you, but it honestly might make my worst of the year list. Overall, I give Mother a 4 out of 10. Style over substance or not, I know In This Moment of talent. This album is just not a good showcase of that. Thank you guys for watching this review roundup. I try to do these roughly every 3 months, but I do full-fledged album reviews more frequently, of course. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and let me know what you think about any of these albums. You can follow me on my social media links in the description, and check out some more videos in the gimmick on screen. I'll see you all next time.